Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a little 9-game slate that starts at 7 p.m. on FanDuel. We have some pretty good games here. I think pitching is going to be a little bit tough today, but overall, I think we have a pretty good slate. I do feel like on FanDuel, the pricing on players is actually really low for this particular slate, surprisingly. It had been kind of high for a few days, but now it feels really low. I felt like there's a lot of value on this particular slate. And pitching is a little bit harder. It didn't feel so good looking at the pitching options. There's nobody real super consistent, but we have some good options just the same. And then as for the batters, we have a lot of good options at each position, so we'll get into that. But before I get started, I want to thank you guys for liking, commenting, and subscribing. Make sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't already and like this video. And also check out the Discord in the link below. And also check out Patreon, where there's some bonuses and stuff there. If you have any comments or questions about any of that, feel free to leave it below or ask me in Discord or just however you want to. And with that said, let's get into the slate itself. So I have a few teams that we can kind of choose from to stack for this slate. The Texas Rangers is one, the Minnesota Twins, the LA Dodgers, the LA Angels, and then San Francisco against Colorado. I think all these teams are stackable today. You could even argue the Colorado Rockies are stackable a little bit, and so are a couple other teams. But overall, I think those are the best options on this particular slate. So let's go ahead and get into the pitchers themselves. So my first pitcher is Lance Lynn. Now, the thing about him is that he hasn't been super consistent, but he has 5 straight games with 40 fantasy points, including one game against Cleveland. In 7 starts, he's been over, in 7 straight, he's been over 32 fantasy points. And in the 4 games that he's played against Cleveland, he's got 41, 32, 40, and -3. So he's not been, he's been more consistent when it comes to what FanDuel wants, because, you kind of can hide some earned runs with strikeouts, which he does tend to do pretty good with. And you can see that he's got some good scores here. But we do have to worry about the one game against Cleveland where he scored just -3. But overall, I think he's a pretty solid option. He's not my favorite option just because Cleveland's kind of been hitting the ball pretty good, but I still think he's probably one of the top 2 options on this particular slate. The next guy is going to be Robbie Ray. I think he is also a top-tier option here against Oakland. Now, Oakland has been hitting the ball okay, but in 3 games against Oakland this season, he has 43, 37, and 63 points. He has had 2 lackluster starts in the last 2 games, but one of those was against Atlanta, which is acceptable, and then the other was against the Angels, which isn't really acceptable, but he's still getting the strikeouts, and he's done this a couple times where we'll have like 2 games in a row where he doesn't do well, but then he bounces back and has a big old 50-point game, and so he's done that several times this season, so I think he's at a spot against Oakland where he can really dominate the game. Just to be aware that Oakland has been playing pretty well, but I think he's in a good spot to do that. The next guy that I'm going to talk about a couple more pitchers just to give you some info on them, but I don't really recommend going off of Lynn or Ray. But I will talk about Luis Severino. He is coming back from injury apparently for this particular game, so he might be a little bit limited in his pitch count. But he is going up against Pittsburgh, and he actually did really well against Pittsburgh the last time he played them. With 37 fantasy points, but he is a little bit risky because he doesn't typically get a ton of strikeouts. I mean, he has in some games, but he's not as strikeout heavy as some of the other guys on the slate, and so he's kind of if you just desperate to save money, you could come down to him. The other guy that you could kind of come down to if you really wanted to is Dustin May for the Dodgers. He's only pitched in 5 games, but he's pitched pretty well, and he's got a plus matchup against the Arizona. The only issue with him is he's been pretty inconsistent on his games. Again, I don't really recommend utilizing him, but he does have some upside in this particular matchup. And then, that's pretty much what I have for pitchers. I don't really like McKenzie against the White Sox or Snell against St. Louis. I mean, Snell has some interesting prospects here with St. Louis, but St. Louis has got several guys hitting the ball pretty well, and that just worries me in this matchup. He does have, Blake Snell has been extremely boomer bust. He seems like he only scores 40 or plus points or under 10. It just doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of in between. And so, he does sometimes have big strikeout games, but he seems a lot more risky on this particular slate because of the matchup. So let's go and get into the catchers and first baseman that I like today. So we have several good options here, especially on FanDuel, where a lot of these guys are underpriced a little bit. So we have Wilmer Flores, who could actually play first, second, or third base for Colorado, and he's been hitting the ball he's averaging about 7.24 a game, but in this series with Colorado, he had a 16-point game and a 3-point game, and I suspect that he'll be able to do similar to that first game again. The next guy that I like is Will Smith for the Dodgers. He's just too cheap, though he is a little bit boomer bust, but he's still somebody you have to consider on this particular slate. Adley Rutschman is a guy that I really like for Baltimore. I think they're kind of sneaky against Matt Manning. Manning has been pretty decent, but I don't think that he's as good as his ERA suggests, and so he has some potential in that game. Rizzo for the Yankees, he's been hitting the ball pretty well lately, and I really like him in this particular matchup against Pittsburgh and one of their terrible pitchers. Then we'll look at Miranda for Minnesota, who kind of looks like they're kind of stackable team with their prices against Daniel Lentz. He's been really kind of boomer bust lately, but he's still a good hitter, and I think he's in a good spot in this matchup. And Ryan Mountcastle is another guy I like for Baltimore. He's been playing pretty well, and I think he's in a good spot against Detroit. And then Luis Arias for Minnesota. He's in a great spot here. He's been playing pretty well lately, and I think he's a guy that can have a big game in this particular matchup against Kansas City. At second base, we have Marcus Semien for Texas against Tucker Davidson and the Angels. This is probably the worst pitcher on the slate, and so I definitely like a lot of the Texas players in this particular situation. And Semien's price is actually fairly decent. Then we have Thairo Estrada. Now, just to be clear, he might be not playing today because of a potential injury. And if that's the case, then whoever comes in to play for him might be the guy that we want to actually use. So just keep an eye on that. He may not be playing. Javier Baez is a guy I really like here for Detroit. He's been hitting the ball extremely well lately, averaging almost 13 fantasy points a game, and he's been playing really good. Then we have Michael Massey, who for Kansas City rather. Now he's kind of boomer bust, but he's been having some big games, and I think he's in a spot where we could potentially take advantage of his super cheap price if you're desperate to save money here. And then we have Gabby Torres for the Yankees, another guy that's almost 14 fantasy points a game, and so I really like him in this matchup as well. Ryan McMahon is somebody that I'm pretty happy with in this particular setup. Not only that, but he's only at $3,100. He's so much cheaper on FanDuel than DraftKings, where he's almost too expensive to even try to roster. Bobby Witt is in a great spot here for Kansas City, averaging almost 9 fantasy points a game. And then Josh Jung for Texas. I really like Texas today against the Angels, and I'm going to try to find a way to get a couple of these guys in here. And Jung is going to be one of the guys where he has boom potential in a game against a really bad pitcher. And then we have Justin Turner, who is just way too cheap for his production. He's been hitting the ball extremely well lately, and I look for him as to be a top option against Arizona in this particular matchup. He's averaging 16 fantasy points a game, and he's $3,400. Gio Urshela is another guy I really like here. He's averaging about 10 fantasy points a game. And then Josh Donaldson is in a nice little plus matchup against Pittsburgh as well. I really like the Yankees guys, and some of these guys are pretty inexpensive, and Donaldson is definitely one of them. There's honestly 3 people at third base that I think that I've got to find a way to put them in the roster: Turner, Donaldson, and McMahon, and hopefully I can find a way to at least fit 2 of them in here. With that said, let's go and get into the shortstops. We have Trey Turner, who has been extremely good for the Dodgers, averaging almost 14 fantasy points a game. Then we have Brandon Crawford, who is in a plus matchup here, obviously, against the Colorado Rockies. He had almost 10 fantasy points in the first game, and his price really does give him some ability in that matchup. Then Carlos Correa is in a great spot here for Minnesota. He's been hitting the ball pretty well lately. I really like him. And then Seager for Texas is in a great spot. He's averaging 10 fantasy points a game against the Angels. I really like the Texas stack in this particular matchup. And then finally, Gunnar Henderson, $3,400, averaging 12 fantasy points a game lately. He's been hitting some home runs, getting hits, RBIs, stuff like that, which is what we really need on this slate. And we have him here at shortstop. In the outfield, we have Jock Peterson. If he ends up playing, which he looks like he will be, he's going to be a guy that's going to have some real potential in this matchup against Colorado. Another guy I like is Ohtani for the Angels. Him and Trout are probably a couple of the guys that I really like for the Angels in this matchup. That he's just been pretty consistent at hitting the ball. Now, granted, he's kind of due for a home run, and that's kind of why I like him, but his price is coming down a little bit. And then Juan Soto, his price is just too cheap for his potential production. He's averaging nearly 10 fantasy points a game. And in the last couple games, he's really gotten going. Excuse me. And he finally got out of a slump, so we like that. Mookie Betts' price has come way down. I felt like he was more expensive than that for a while. Obviously, he's been kind of in a slump, but the second he gets out of it, he's going to start booming again, and his price will go right back up. Then I have Judge, who, he's just hit number 60. He's hitting so good. I mean, it's just nutty how many points he's scoring every day, averaging 20 fantasy points a game. That's why his price is $5,300. But he's somebody you can almost not afford. If you can afford him, then you put him in there. And then Mike Trout. Now he's been a little bit less exciting than Judge has the last couple of days, but he's still doing extremely well. And then Yastrzemski for San Francisco. Assuming he plays, he's in a great spot here, and he'll have home run potential in this game, as will Cedric Mullins. For Baltimore. He's way too cheap for his production, and so I really like him in this matchup. I know he hasn't been hitting the ball quite as well as normal, but I still think he's in a great spot here against Detroit. So overall, I think it's a really solid slate. I think we got a lot of good options, a lot of good games here, and then, obviously we'll have to figure out the pitchers. But on this particular slate, you can pretty much pay for whatever pitch you want because there's so much value on the pricing ranges on a lot of the players. So with that said, thank you guys again for liking, commenting, and subscribing. Again, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to ask me in comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe, and have a nice day.